So, preface to Lyrical Ballads. Up to paragraph 12 we have to deal, and this is the sixth lecture on the same. So, hopefully we will finish it off today. So, up to paragraph number 12. And I told you, normally in theory essays we do not have such a paragraph wise division, but for our better dealing and grasping, it's really better for us to divide any essay into paragraphs and discuss it as such. So, in the same way, with the Preface to Lyrical Ballads by William Wordsworth, that is, Lyrical Ballads is the text, and he added a preface for the second edition, and we have been discussing that all these sessions, and today we have till date we have finished off up to paragraph number 9, and today we have the continuation of the same, that is from paragraph number 10 onwards. So he tells, in a poem, a series of lines, a single in which the language though naturally arranged and according to the strict law of meter does not differ from that of prose. So this is the major point that comes in the next the coming session. More than that, nothing is actually he is talking about poetry and prose. So last session we ended discussing that poetry as something, as a kind of writing that holds an inherited mode of structuring or inherited model. See, poets inherit something like poetic device, or it is going to be only poem or only a standard poem or only a standard composition only if you add these poetic devices. So this had been the way these traditional writers or the contemporaries till date of Wordsworth had been dealing or had been thinking. So he was taking a very different turn, we know, that is Wordsworth and his other co-writers, fellow writers, or the writers of this romantic revival. They wanted something else, entirely different. And in the same way, here we are having a different take on poetry and prose. Nowhere we had been considering poetry and prose to be the same, but he asserts, or he would like to assert, that a series of lines, a single line in which the language through it, though naturally arranged and according to the strict law of meter. Poetry, we know, of course, it is not written as continuous sentences, but sometimes it is even with enjambment. We know how one line breaks to the other. Sometimes it is just one word in one line, and next the next part is to the next line. Even though the continuous theme is discussed, you can divide stanzas. So these difference of writing or structuring we always note down in poetry, right? So that we expect it to be entirely different, or we have been thinking that to be entirely different from prose and many other writings. That is the sentence, like continuous sentences to talk about our theme. Normally we know how we write an essay. In one paragraph we talk about a particular aspect. The next paragraph talks about the different aspect of the topic that we are writing, and the next theme, if comes, we divide, or we opt to go for the next paragraph. So this is the way we have it in prose, but poetry doesn't do that, but it has a kind of division among lines. Sometimes it is broken in that way. So this is the difference we essentially expect in between poetry and prose. But he says that there is no such essential, or does not hold that kind of a difference. So better poetry writing as well as prose writing, you cannot always make an essential difference, or that is not really very different, entirely different. You cannot say that poetry is highly different from prose, the language of poetry and prose. That arrangement may be somewhat different, but he says that we cannot always say that language of poetry is highly different from that of prose. That means we even expect poetic language to be more complicated or more ornamental. Okay, that's why we talk about poetic fiction. We never talk about poetic diction. We never talk about prose diction. Okay, you have a complicated way of writing prose. You can write a complicated essay. You can use different kinds of language. Poetry also, you can make it simple or tough. But till date, that contemporaries of Wordsworth, like the metaphysical writers or the other ones, even not metaphysical but neoclassic writers, all of them thought that only very tough words or something entirely beyond the capability of normal human intelligentsia holds the standard or deserves the appreciation of poetry. If you have to call poem a poem, it should be very tough, it should be very complicated beyond our normal capability of grasping. So this is the way they used to think, and Wordsworth wants to assert that this is a wrong notion. Okay, so prose is not entirely, so the language of poetry and the language of prose, those are not entirely different. That's what he wants to assert. And he continues, not only the language of a large portion of every good poem, even of the most elevated character must necessarily, except with a reference to the meter, in no respect differ from that of good prose. So except for meter, we talked about meter. I gave you some last time while dealing with the poetry paper. We had this meter as a topic. That is again that comes under prosody. We have meters, different meters that you can use in a poetic composition. So that is the. Apart from that, this language of poetry and language of prose, those are not really very different. Okay, from that of good prose, there is no much differ from it, except for the reference with a meter. That may be different. Meter, of course, you do not talk about meter, metrical composition in prose writings. Whether it is an essay or article or short story, or even the higher forms like the larger forms like novel, you do not talk about meter, metrical composition. But we have this language staying almost the same. That of good prose is not really very different from poetry. That's what he wants to assert. But likewise, that some of the most interesting parts of the best poems will be found to be strictly the language of prose when prose is well written, provided that prose is well written. If you write the prose in a very good manner, a very desirable way, if you use the language in a desirable manner, that language of prose is not at all entirely different from language of poetry. You do not have to see that poetry is somewhere more elegant and it outrivals all the other writing styles, all the other literary genre. So this is not needed, he says. You give too much of importance to poetry, and that's why you are very particular about making it complicated beyond the human reach, our intelligence. It's almost sometimes when we read the poem, it's almost we feel like it is beyond. It's written for not for grasping, not for reading, and not for enjoying, but for their own sake. So why it's this deliberate complication you are going for? You make it simple. You talk about the nature. You talk about birds, flowers, garden, woods. See, this is the way he wants to assert the simplicity that can be there in the language of poetry also. That is the entirely different notion from the existing traditions like neoclassicism. who always asserted that to be really tough and really beyond our reading capability, that at least beyond the capability of the layman, grasping power of the layman readers. Of course, scholars may not find it very difficult, but poetry or prose or whatever literary piece of writing may it be, it is for the sake of reading it, because already in his preface, Wordsworth has asserted pleasure is the major point or major aim of poetry. That also should be one of the main aims of poetry, goals of poetic composition. It's not always like didactic. What do you mean by didactic? No, didactic means teaching, morals, values. He's asserting that, and you're making it more and more complicated. It will not help anyone. So at that point he talks about making it simple and for the reading of the public in general. Okay, so that's all with the paragraph number 10. Okay, next, paragraph number 11. You can see in the essay. Hope it's with you. Please make the presentation more clear. See, you have this poem, a part of a Gray's poem. I'm not going to read it, you have to. But what he says about that, we will have to see. That's Gray's poem, a sonnet. Okay, it's a sonnet fully. It's not okay. Fine, it's a sonnet. And to show certain lines, the language of the lines under mentioned, he has given a particular part there. Under mention, that is in italics, I think it's in italics, it's given that. Let me read that. Okay, fine, I'll read that for you. In vain me the smiling mornings shine, and reddening Phoebus lifts his golden fire. The birds in vain their amorous descents join, or cheerful fields resume their green attire. These ears, alas, for the notes repine. Hope you can see that. Next lines, you please note down, a different object do these eyes require. My lonely anguish melts no heart but mine, and in my breast the imperfect joys expire. Yet morning smiles the busy race to cheer, and so on. So you please read it later. But what he says, that is about this poem by Thomas Gray. Who is Thomas Gray? Who is Gray? Who is Thomas Gray? Elegy written in a country churchyard and many other poems. You know, the transitional writer, the very elegant writer. So here he says that it does not differ from that of prose. That underline that that lines in italics, you may feel like reading a prose. It's a very straightforward sentence. Not very real shift between noun and verb. Normally that is the way you make it more poetic. You shift the pattern. Sometimes normal sentences we have subject, verb, object, pattern and all. And these poets try to make it more different with this shift between the order, shifting the order of the sentence, normal sentence structure, and breaking it here and there, so that we do not feel it like a normal sentence. That is what their normal way of making it more poetic, or somewhere what is it, entirely different from other kinds of compositions. Fine. But here he asserts that is Wordsworth tells that it is also that italics, words in italics, the most beautiful part. It's not that really different from the prose. Yeah, prose sentences we know, we say the sentences in this length. Okay. Now to paragraph number 12, and the last paragraph as far as the syllabus prescribed part of that's paragraph number 1 to 12. Actually under prescription we have this much part only to be dealt with, but as I told you, Wordsworth's preface, normally it is more than that, and we have more than 22 paragraphs actually divided as such. If you divide the whole essay, that part preface, we have more than 20 paragraphs And here we have to end up the discussion with the paragraph number 12 itself, because at the UG level only this much is needed. Okay. Okay. As per our syllabus, I tell you. I don't know whether the full length essay. No, there is not much chance. At PG level you may have, but at UG level you do not actually. So paragraph number 12. The language of prose may yet be well adapted to poetry. He again and again wants to assert the same thing. There is nothing more or complicated or something new you cannot expect. This whole part talks about how you can relate or how you can expect or assert the fact that prose and poetry, the language is not really different from that of prose. What may be his idea, what may be his aim? You should be able to relate all the notion which is already given by Wordsworth at a different point of or at a different part of his essay. He has been asserting in the very beginning paragraphs itself about making it the language of order, making poetry or composing poetry by adopting the language of men, laymen, that language really spoken by men in the very genuine context, like without much coloring, without losing the innocence of the daily life conversation, everything. So this is another take on the same assertion. That's what we have to see here. He wants to assert that again and again. He says prose and poetry not well adapted, that can be, see, prose may yet be well adapted to poetry, the language of prose. Okay, and affirms there is neither is nor can be any essential difference between the language of prose and metrical composition. So he makes the assertion very perfect. They both speak by and to the same organs. Same organs, he means the senses. You are reading a poem, so you are sensing it as such. So the same organs, you see it, you hear it. When I read a poetry for you, when I read a prose for you, you are reading it your mind comprehends it. So it's read and comprehended by the same organs. The bodies in which both of them are clothed may be said to be of the same substance. So you take a poetry, you take a prose, you take a novella, whichever it may be, it is clothed in the same substance. It means you have it in the you have poetry, prose, novel, everything in the canon of English literature, in the canon of Malayalam literature, in the canon of Tamil literature. So this is a part of the whole. And you do not have to differentiate or you don't have to assert or to be obstinate. What do you mean by obstinate? You stick on to an idea. You're very particular about asserting your point. Don't do that. Prose and poetry, they all hold the same of the same substance. Their affections are kindred and almost identical. And we expect poetry and prose to talk about the humane nature, natural beauties, other themes, other concepts, all those are in one way or other connected to our daily life. Fine. So in that regard, not necessarily differing even in degree, even at least an iota of difference you don't have to find out or you don't have to try to assert, because it is, you take it as one of the literary types, one of the genres in which you can talk things in simplified manner, you can talk things in a very complicated manner. It's up to the traditional, it's up to the tradition that you belong to. If you are a metaphysical writer, you may be in search of something very complicated, many other imageries. Some symbolic writers may opt for even more complicated symbols. All these are possible. But as a whole, That can be done in novels as also. You might have come across very different. See, some novels belong to the tradition of semiotics. You have not come across the term yet. Semiotics, symbols. Oh, whole novel completely working upon some symbols, and you find it very difficult to read the same. You cannot always then say that poetry only holds the symbol or those things, but you give too much prominence. And the existence of this prosody as an area of poetic composition, or talking about poetic composition itself, gets you this assertion. But Wordsworth tells you to think differently, act differently, or to approach it differently. Poetry sheds no tears such as angels weep. It's a very sarcastic comment he makes. He says that poetry does not make that kind of an angel-like weeping, but natural and human tears. She can boast of no celestial choir that distinguishes her vital juices from that of prose. The same human blood circulates through the veins of them both. It's not celestial choir that distinguishes her vital juices. Why are you asserting that poetry only is elegant, elevated in style and all? It's not angel weeping, it's normal human tears. That means to make it more clear that it's not something angel, celestial, all these are terms attached with something extraordinary. It's beyond our ordinary plane of understanding. So that he says about, or he asserts that it's not angel weeping, it's not celestial choir that distinguishes her vital juices. There is no vital juice of that kind as such. The same human blood circulates through the veins of them both. Poetry or prose or any other type of drama, you please note down, there is no such vital juice as you have been. Which is whom does he mean actually here? Every time he means mainly he would like to talk, or he would like to address the adamant, strict and adamant composition of the neoclassic tradition, or the neoclassic contemporaries of his time. He would like to address all this. You think that poetry only is celestial or vital or something extra powerful, but that is not the case. So again, his main point is to assert once again that you can bring the natural or very layman life situations into your composition, and even then your poetic language will not be deformed, or it will not go down in the standard will not be at stake. You can talk about the very innocent life of rural life of people, and that language of poetry and prose. You expect such a language, daily life conversation, everything to be part only of prose. The language of prose only can talk about or to communicate their ideas, layman, their daily life conversation. Everything can be referred or communicated in the language of prose only, not at all in poetry. Poetry is somewhere elegant. This had been the idea you had been holding, but that is not the case. He says, or he asserts, Wordsworth asserts that there is no vitality as such, there is no vital juice as such as you have been thinking or asserting. Please, neoclassical writers and the readers who stick on to their tradition, their poetry only, please come and read my poems. It will not dissatisfy you, it will enlighten you. This is the exhortation he makes, Wordsworth. So this that's all with this part up to paragraph number 12. So this today's session we have dealt with poetry, prose, and how the language of poetry and prose, how much effort Wordsworth takes in all these sessions to talk about the difference, or to talk or to erase the difference between the language of poetry and the language of prose, which had been asserted throughout the centuries, because poetry, many traditions gave too much prominence to poetic diction. That is the point, poetic diction, to talk about poetic diction separately and to assert poetic diction as such, so that we have this tendency to think or to make it far beyond the reach of normal layman understanding. But as the whole tradition of romantic revival or romantic literature as a whole would like to make it more readily available for the theme, or as well as the grasping everything they expect out of the normal human beings or the normal intelligence, the normal people who are not very scholarly but still can enjoy reading everything. So that's all for the time being. Thank you.